if we think that AI is actually getting closer to human and human intelligence, then you kind of have to treat AI as a human as well. And I think there's one special prompting techniques our engineering team found is that it's a lot harder to tell the AI what not to do comparing to tell the AI what to do. And it's kind of aligned with humans as well.
Hello, welcome to Deep Learning with PolyAI. I'm joined today by Shawn Wen, co-founder and CTO at PolyAI. Hi, Shawn.
Hello.
And today we're going to carry on our discussion about how to build a voice assistant, and we're going to focus on LLMs. So, Shawn, a couple of episodes back, you said, I think, I'll paraphrase you, the LLMs are 70%, are good enough to get you 70% of the way in terms of building a voice assistant. So
Yeah.
today I want to talk about that other 30%. Why can we not just plug in a really great LLM and have our voice assistant work straight away?
Yeah. I think that was like two episode ago, and I think LM is actually just wanted to clarify, right? It's actually get you to that 70% records. It's like something that we won't be able to do in the previous generation of the technology because the kind of conversation ability need to be carefully encrypted, and then a lot of these conversations, you kind of have to foresee how it happens and how can the bot answers where should progress the conversation. So you kind as a developer of these kind of voice assistant, you kind of need to foresee a lot of the conversational paths beforehand, which is like quite it's not really doable because like humans don't actually having a conversation that way. And I think plugging in LLM instead, just making it a lot more powerful because these models have learned from billions of conversations before in different kind of contexts, different scenarios. So therefore, like a lot of the people these days, once you integrate into LLM and you put a speech recognition on top of it, which we also covered why it's not that straightforward from the speech side, but even from the large language model side, it's also not that easy, right? Plug in a chatbot, and then you have a LLM based chatbot. When you talk to it in all sort of different ways, it feels really powerful. But there's a lots of pitfalls come with it afterwards, which is like, the I would say it's like two sides of the same coin. So basically the previous generation technology, the intent-based model, it's very precise. So if you want a bot to actually take down a particular business logic, you can do it very easy. It's just very clear. Like if the user say this, the bot should do this and say that. And the user say this, you should do other things otherwise. So that's very straightforward. As from a builder point of view, is very like clear, like what to expect. And then a lot of times the contact center IT managers like that idea because, they kind of wanted to have a control of the user experience. And then that's how they've been doing that with their contact center agents is that they give the agents a manual and say, hey, like in these scenarios, you can do the refund automatically. In that scenario, you have to ask the reason why and then take them through a process.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. I think it the intent-based model. So we used to use intent-based models a lot, right? And we still do in a couple of
That's
instances.
right.
Clients, want that level of control. Um, But I think even with intent-based models, you get that control, but it kind of came at the cost of it could get very complex very quickly,
I
right?
mean,
So depending on how many things you want to blend, you end up with this massive decision tree that becomes
that's
very
right.
complicated.
Exactly, yeah. So I think that's really the problem of the intent-based model. And as you can imagine, as the voice assistant capability continue to expand, the system will become more and more fragile because there are so many different branches that you have to expect and things like that. So, and then I think that's where LLM is actually more powerful than the intent-based models because now it's just a one single model. It tries to match the input sentence patterns and then based on the instructions and then prompt you provide to the system, and it just generate the most reasonable response afterwards.
Yeah.
Now, the 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 issue here it comes with LLM, and I think that you will probably see a lot of people online already complaining about it. It's just not. It feels like a very talented student that you tell them to do certain things, but then they figure out how to do other things instead, and then they just don't follow your instructions. And that's what kind of problems we have to deal with LLM
Yeah,
based.
I guess it's different to a customer service use case, but when I was using ChatGPT the other day to try and come up with some pithy marketing statements, right? It didn't give me anything good. But every time it gave me some responses, I'd say, no, make it more like this or change it in this respect. And it's a lot better than it was
Mhm.
at being able to understand that I'm applying that same context from, the first request and then doing that. So it feels like generative AI is getting better
Yeah,
at these like multi-turn, conversations, right?
that's
Uh,
right.
but I guess when it comes to making a booking or making a payment or some other kind of transaction, maybe we're not quite there yet.
Yeah, I think, the kind of use cases you're using, you are actually using LLM and or it is AI models actually co-pilot with you to
Yeah.
accomplish tasks. And it's
Yeah.
actually very powerful that way because you can actually iterative prompting the agent and getting closer to what you want. The problem of deploying this in the contact center and in a direct user-facing applications is this is kind of an autopilot, application. That means that because the user or the coder will not be cooperative with the LLM because they, I mean, first of all, is that they probably don't know how to use the tool that much yet, and then this is probably the first time they are talking to them, and they don't know that they have a issue in mind. They just wanted to get it done, and then they wanted to get it done as soon as possible. In that kind of scenarios, it's very hard to imagine the coder or the user would actually to cope with it.
Yeah, that's I can't remember who I was talking to, someone at PolyAI recently about prompt engineering, right? And
Yeah,
ChatGPT is very good when I say I want this. It does a pretty good job of understanding what it is. But I think there are instances, right, where maybe if you repeat something a couple of times, it just performs better. Or if you do something that you maybe wouldn't expect
yeah,
to say or do, it actually improves the performance of the LLM. So I guess if you're a customer, you're kind of being asked to be a prompt engineer if you're relying purely on the LLM to do that.
that's right. Yeah, and I think a lot of these like response generation, the quality of it is still. I mean, people have been talking about issue of hallucinations, and then fabricating content that doesn't exist. I think this is a very legitimate concern and a very prominent issue that people have been seeing, and then there are some challenges in deploying this into consumer facing applications. There's other aspect of it, which, in order to make these LM really powerful in the context and center automation, you still need the LM to integrate to the backend systems of yours. And that's what we call a tool called coding or the function called abilities. These abilities basically saying that based on a particular conversational context, LM would decide the best decision is not to generate a response, is to actually query a third-party API, getting the information in, and then integrating that information into the response. An example would be if you ask the LM, what is the weather in London right now? And the LM should know there's an API it can call to get this weather information with like London as location, and then incorporating this API return result back to the reader response.
Right. So I guess again, and I keep going back to ChatGPT because it's something that we've all tried and we've all used.
Yeah,
You were to ask ChatGPT, what's the weather in London today? I guess it's been programmed to know that when someone's asking for the weather, it's going to go and look at the Met office or
yeah.
whatever.
So basically, like in a lot of these, like, ChatGPT in the back end, and then people have already building a lot of applications around it. In
Yeah.
order to actually make these LLMs more powerful, is to integrating real-time third-party informations into the system. Let it to be the weather, your calendar, your conversation between you and your colleagues, or the contact center real-time information of the contact center's voice. And these are all very valuable information to integrate it into this and then make it empower. The one of the real major challenges that we're seeing in integrating this, even the best models out there, let's say GPT-4, GPT-4o, the problem is that we have this metric we call the function call error rate, which is basically like how frequently that the bot should supposed to call an API with a set of parameters, but it actually does the wrong thing, right?
Right.
And what's even worse on top of it is that the bot would say, okay, I will check the weather for you, but actually didn't call the API at all. And then fabricating an answer back to you. So that problem started to compound. So
Right.
imagine, I think weather API is okay, right? Like, you can say that, the bot just hallucinating, but thinking about if you are making a reservation to a restaurant, the bot say, oh, I have made a reservation for you, but it actually didn't call the API. And then you show up in the restaurant and the owner was like, hey, sorry, you didn't make the book. They would be very disappointed.
Yeah. So how do you get around that? How do you trust that it's doing what it's told customers that it's doing?
Yeah, I think there are. I mean, that is basically why we are measuring the function call error rate,
Yeah.
because you a real application you need to actually drive that function call error rate to close to zero, really. Like, but I think in a lot of just like a very basic implementation, just following the OpenAI manual of how to prompting GPT, how to create function calls. What we are seeing that is, in general, the function call error rate we are seeing is about at least a 10 to 20% error, which is pretty high, and then it's higher than you expected. I think, which is like also reasonable because these kind of models are very powerful to do certain kind of tasks, but the kind of tasks that we are prompting them to do, they have not seen it before. So imagine if you are not seen that before, I just put you on the job, and then to do the job, you have to figure out along the way. Right? So that's kind of like the situation we are facing there.
Okay. And then is this where things like guardrails come in and dialogue management, like additional work that you do around the LLM to get that 10 to 20% down? Because obviously, if you're a PolyAI client and we're taking restaurant bookings, we don't want 10 to 20% of your customers showing up and they have
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. So I think there are a couple of like techniques to tackle that particular problem. But usually people will start it with a lot of prompting techniques. And then that's why like, prompting engineers becoming a thing these days. Because like you thought that you're just writing a text to LLM, then the LLM should just work. But it's actually not that trivial. So that's why like people started to talk about prompt engineer is like a real job, a real title, for the future, right? So I think there's a lot of like tactics to actually prompt the bot to be able to more reliable. One, for example, one particular pattern we are seeing is that despite the fact that these models have longer and longer context window, the fact is that if you are cramping too much information in one single prompt, despite that the context window can fit those information in, the model still have a much higher likelihood to get things, which kind of makes sense. If I send you a manual of like 100 pages and then say that, this is like the instructions you have to follow when users say certain things, you will get it wrong majority of time as well. But if I only give you one page, then it's much more clear. And then, you can follow that instructions more, easily. So what we do internally is that we'll have this dialogue management component on top of it. We haven't actually really figured out how we should call it yet, but it seems like the product team would prefer to call them talk tracks. So it's the
Yeah.
idea of like not to craft every single conversation and every transition, just like so before you go on the stage to actually give a speech, you will probably write down a few bullet points to make sure that these three bullet points are on top of your head, so that you can talk around those points, right? So that kind of ideas.
Okay, so building like an additional framework that can sit on top of the LLM and just check, like, check it's done this, check it's done this, make
Yeah.
sure that it follows the path without limiting it to the path in the way that an intent-based model.
Yeah. And then just to give you another example is that in a traditional intent-based model, it's more about, I create like a very clear flow diagram with a lot of if-else statements. And then if you go into this, you go there and then you do that in etc. Everything's very programmatic.
Yeah.
The way we are doing it. So I think then the LLM way of doing it is that I throw you a 100-page user manual, and then you figure out. So LLM skim through the entire text, like 100 pages, and then try to come up with the answer. The way we are doing is something in between. It's
Yeah.
kind of like now this 100 page, I'm going to group these pages together for you. So you have like 10 categories you have to think about. And then you put very lightweight rule on top to say, if a user talk about payment, you should, refer to these like 5 pages. And if
Yeah.
the user is talking about something else, you should refer to that. And then within those pages, they are probably like step-by-step instructions as well, how to proceed that transaction. What we do is that, think about like we paginize the steps. So like, the bot just need to follow the instructions step by step rather than, like, oh, this is like a huge A4 document, just to read it and then answer.
Yeah, really interesting. I suppose in the intent-based world, it was like having an agent who's working off the script all the time.
Yeah,
And in the generative world, it's like an agent who is off script, right? They've learned it, they know what to do, and now they can be natural, flow through the conversation, but you can sort of trust them with
that's
the
right.
dialogue management.
Yeah.
Wow.
So basically, all we are doing with these talk checks or dialogue management component is really to bring back the control to the contact center
Yeah,
manager, which they used to have with the intent-based
yeah,
assistants, or with Gen AI, they don't, and then they feel like, quite scared and they worry about it. We are trying to create this software there to bring back the control, but still not compromising the performance of what the LLM can bring
yeah.
to their bot.
Interesting. And you were talking about prompt engineering, and I suppose because it's not as simple as just saying, "Here's what, do this to the LLM." There's very specific ways that you have to ask,
Yeah,
prompt it. And I guess, a lot of this is kind of in the black box, right? You don't know necessarily which prompt is gonna work. And I think this is getting better documented, people are learning a lot. But I think this concept of the black box is one of the main concerns about LLMs. Is like, what is actually going on? How
that's
can I be sure that, that it's following my processes, that it's doing what I
that's
want it
right.
to do for my customers?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so I think another important concept of this, dialogue management component we are trying to bring it into it is that we are going to help because contact centers always have their processes. So we are going to help the contact center managers to say, break down the entire transaction, let's say like a reservation, for example,
Yeah.
break it down into several steps. And let's say there are 4 steps for example. Each steps, it has its own module or own prompt or instruction inside it.
Yeah.
And LLM within that box, it can do whatever it wants. But at the end of that transaction, you always need to make sure a function call got triggered so that the entire state of the conversation changed to the next stage. So that becomes a checkbox exercise, right? So each of the LLM subprocesses would have a checkbox at the end to say, hey, like all the tasks in that box has been accomplished. So that you can move on to the next stage. So that when you look at the conversation later on, okay, the bot actually ticked all 3 of the boxes, but the last one didn't tick. That's why the code got transferred. Or like all the boxes got checked so that you can proceed to say, oh, I have finished the transaction. Right. And those checkboxes would includes important APIs need to be queried, important information need to be registered in a database. There are a lot of these, like processes you can put around it to make sure the bot is actually doing what it says is doing.
It sounds like there's a lot of compliance work that needs to happen. So
Yeah,
even once you've built this thing, right, you've got a team of people who've built this thing, they're running it. Somebody needs to be monitoring it and making sure that it is doing what it needs to be doing.
that's right. That's right. Yeah. So I think, like, therefore, like, having a team of experts who knows how to build this kind of thing, because I think the fact is that LM for voice assistant and contact center is still in its early stage. There's a lot of things that people are still figuring out along the way, and I think it will be quite a very expensive process try to do this entire thing, by yourself in turn.
Yeah, we've seen some examples out there from big customers, and I won't name and shame, not big customers of ours, I should say, big companies
Mhm.
who've deployed generative bots that have gone rogue, right? That have
Yeah,
hallucinated. Um, and yeah, I suppose that just demonstrates that there is a lot to learn around how we make this happen. That said, we have a couple of our clients running on purely generative AI deployments, and they seem to be performing well.
yeah, yeah. I mean, those like applications, we actually did put in a lot of effort to
Yeah.
continuous improvement. Because like it's not really the right thing to say that we get everything's right at the first.
Yeah.
I think that we also like just through years of experiences and putting the right play, like the right technology, the right procedures in the right places to make sure that everything is smooth for those.
Yeah, you kind of wanna, if you've been there, done that, seen it all go wrong, you're in a good position then to be able to make these tweaks, build these frameworks, do all
Right.
this additional work to really, yeah, make it secure, make it work
Yeah.
for your customers. Cool. So, um, what else should people know about LLMs when they're thinking about building a voice assistant?
Yeah, I think one thing, there are two per subjects. You mentioned a little bit about guardrail, but we
Yeah.
haven't actually talked too much around it yet. I think a lot of people talking about guardrails, GenAI safety, and all things alike, and then a lot of like the governments across the world is trying to regulating it. I think there's one thing I think that we realized maybe like earlier this year is that, genetic safety is a very important topics, and prompt injection issues is a
Yeah.
real issue. We've seen a lot of examples, the deployments that they have failed previously. I think it's important to think about this kind of prompt injection issue as a new cybersecurity frontier, really. Like,
Mm.
if you think about cybersecurity, how they deal with these kind of threats, it's not to create a system that is 100% bulletproof because it's impossible. Cybersecurity is the space where the defense technology continues to improve, but the attack techniques and technology also continue to improve.
Yeah.
Well, so it's kind of like a never-ending war that you have to constantly fight. And I think that's the same thing with generalized safety. It's the same thing with like, these prompt injections because people will constantly figure out a new way to prompt your bot to do something that it is not supposed to do. And
Yeah.
I think the most important thing is that if we have the way to treat this general safety as a cybersecurity problem, then I think the most important thing is not to have a bulletproof LLM or bulletproof systems in the first place. It's more about how do you do threat detection when a threat happens, and how do you do the reporting so you have the visibility around it, and also the mitigation procedures afterwards, right? And then you need to build up a continuous plan around it as well. So I think that's the right kind of mindset, right kind of approach to think about the problem. We are very lucky that working with one of the largest, with the British telco, and their cybersecurity is like really really good
Yeah.
because just they actually identify that this is actually general safety is just a cybersecurity issue, and then they help us to actually shape our strategy towards that. So, but I think that's not a very obvious one, but I think that people would actually realize that will be the case.
Yeah, it's sort of, it's almost like the better this technology gets, the more you sort of almost move backwards and think about it in the same way that you think about people,
Yeah,
right? In that a lot of the big hacks that we've seen recently have been the result of social engineering.
That's right.
which is, prompt engineering is almost a type of social engineering, right, on robots rather than on people. So it totally makes sense that having that arm of cybersecurity that is focused on this
Yeah,
is going to be how this works in the future.
exactly.
So I've heard people talking about, training their own models and small language models. Is that something that you need to think about if you're going to build this out yourself? And
Yeah,
I guess there's two questions there. Do you need to think about the size of the model,
yeah,
and do you need to think about how much custom data it is trained on from your use case?
yeah. I think the custom LLMs or specialized LLMs is the
Yeah.
future. And I think size is like, the smaller size, of course, is cheaper, is easier to run. It has a lot of engineering benefit associated with. But it's kind of like, not the most interesting point, right? I think the the argument to have a specialized smaller LLM is that because these models can actually do better for that particular special task that you have at hand. And I think that's also aligned with the human evolution as well. If you think about in the 14th, 15th centuries, you have Da Vinci's that can actually do everything, right? It's a scientist, also artist, also a, theoretical physics or whatever. The person can do everything, and he's a very generalist. But then, as uh, the human society continues to evolve, specialization is a key. Right? Now,
Yeah.
these days, we have different people in different of their job roles, and they are doing a very good job, and in their particular role. The only reason just because they were trained to specialize to specialize those tasks, right? So like, I don't think there's going to be a model that can actually fits all. Maybe that's the way that we get closer to, AGI, but like specialized model would be the primary adoption in industries and in
Yeah.
the future, because that's just how the entire world evolves. And that's just like the theory.
And that's how people work. That's how call centers work. They have special ACD groups, right, of people who have
Exactly. Yeah.
who can definitely do this one thing really well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I think, like now, I think people are debating about general model to custom model. I think that's, because it's a very interesting topic to
Yeah.
debate and to discuss. But I think the, the truth is actually just right there. It just like depends on, I think it's the matter of like when, is not the matter of how.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Shawn. I think throughout this episode, I have continued to refer to compare generative AI to a person and the way that a person learns. And I
Yeah.
think it's worth highlighting that that's a very easy trap to fall into. It's a very easy way to try and understand this technology, but
Yeah.
that we're still at a point where we don't know how some of this works. We're still figuring it out. In academia, it's still being figured out.
Yeah.
And there are things that we can do, but don't just think, oh, this is a really smart person. I'll just let them do whatever. You know,
Yeah,
um,
yeah, yeah, exactly. I think I like to just on a last note, right? If we think that AI is actually getting closer to human and human intelligence, then you kind of have to treat AI as a human as well. And I think there's one special prompting techniques our engineering team found is that it's a lot harder to tell the AI what not to do comparing to tell the AI what to do. And it's kind of aligned with humans as well. If you have like, teenager, boys and
yeah,
girls, not to do this, and they will definitely going to do that. So I think it's a very interesting, my career of like, working with AI and
yeah,
machine learning, just continue to see a lot of knowledge there. But yeah,
yeah. Fascinating. I think it's only going to continue to become more interesting, and with that, more confusing, but
yeah,
also hopefully more effective as well.
yeah,
So thank you very much, Shawn, for talking about LLMs with us today. I think next time we may talk about speech generation,
yeah.
which is a whole other side of things that I'm sure will open a whole new can of worms. But
Yeah.
until then, thanks for joining us, Shawn, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. See you soon.